Thank you everyone for signing on. We are going to get started and we will be recapping the this year's annual Marketing Partner Forum. So innovation, it was the word we heard over and over and over again at the conference and really on every single panel. The theme of the conference was innovation. Innovation is happening at a neck-breaking speed. This is really not an environment for status quo. It's very much the adapt or die mentality. If you're not a law firm that innovates in some fashion, whether it be for your clients, for your staff, you'll be extinct in 5 years. And this is directly from one of the panelists' mouth that we'll be talking about later on. When we think about innovation, oftentimes we think about innovations that change history, everything from Edison creating artificial light or the computers or technology or, even some of the relatively recent innovations like Netflix or lightning speed internet. I mean, it wasn't so long ago when we had that dial-up process or we were using pagers. What we know is that our world and competitive landscape is metamorphosing at a rapid pace. We have really changed the way we market. We've changed the way we do business, the way that we bring value to clients, the way we stand out, the way we bill. I mean, really everything. And we have no choice but to continue innovating and identifying new ideas and ways to reshape what we've always done. So how do we provide real value to clients? How do we innovate? How do we differentiate ourselves? Our careers and firms really depend on coming up with these answers and just constantly rethinking them all the time. For law firms, I think one panelist said it best. We need to step down from the ivory tower and take note that innovation happens at every level. It's not relationship specific, it's not size specific. Being innovative for law firms, it really means peeking around the corner to determine what's on the horizon. And these were a lot of the things that were heard just multiple times at MPF this year. And we're going to talk to you today extensively about how you innovate. So just by way of introduction, my name is Megan Braverman, principal with Berbay Marketing and Public Relations. We're a marketing and PR firm. We help law firms propel their business and marketing objectives.
And I'm Account Director, Crea. So thank you so much for joining us today. And as we go through the presentation, please feel free to submit any questions during or afterwards. We'll answer them as they come in. So I'll be taking us into the next few slides on the keynote presentation. So this presentation was given by Duncan Wardell. He's the former head of innovation at the Walt Disney Company. And during his 25-year career as head of innovation and creativity, he learned many things about building a profitable business and creating a winning and creative culture. So during his presentation, he talked about really the most important thing he learned, which is if you want to be different, you have to think different. So it seems straightforward enough, right? But it could not be more wrong. We all know that innovation and creativity really just don't happen on demand. There are barriers that prevent us from being creative. And one example he led with that really rang true and for pretty much everyone in this situation before is when you're in a discussion, or it could be a heated discussion or even an argument, and the other person says something really witty or sarcastic and has a really great line, and you want to respond, but you can't think of a comeback. You can't, and not until much later, perhaps when you're driving home or you're in the shower, it dawns on you that, I should have said this. So why does that happen? And it's because our brains are busy. We're preoccupied with thinking and worrying. And we'll get into this a little further in the presentation, but first, Duncan really gets into what the biggest barriers to innovation. And so the biggest barriers here that we pointed out here, and he talked about it, is time. So we have really busy lives. We work a lot. We don't have time to think or to create, and our brains are preoccupied. The second is fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of failing. We're all really truly risk adverse individuals. And the third barrier is culture. I mean, we all work in a kind of Wall Street mentality, right? Where we have to grind away, we have to work hard to earn a good living. This is starting to change a little bit. I mean, new generations are more about purpose now than money, but culture also needs to be fostered. And many companies don't really encourage creativity or welcome new ideas. So they get shot down. And so, everyone take a minute to really think about our own situations. Are we reductionists? Do you foster creativity or do you shoot it down? So in the presentation, Duncan really asked for examples of what are some of the common phrases we hear or are used when shooting down an idea. And some of them were, that would cost a lot of money, or we tried that already, or interesting, but. So Duncan says instead you should say yes and. So the concept is not really about saying yes to everything. It's just an exercise in making ideas bigger, which could actually lead to some really good ideas. So when you say yes, but, it makes everything smaller. And really small ideas don't ever succeed. So one of the things he said that really stood out is you can't turn a small idea into a big one, but you can make a big idea smaller. And finally, one of the points he made is yes, and really makes the idea become both of yours. So it's a great way to get buy-in and just a good tool to use. So who is the most innovative and creative population? It's kids. And why? Why are they the most creative? I mean, they're curious, they're innocent, they break the rules, they play, they create, they're spontaneous, they don't care. And so we lose a lot of that when we become adults. But luckily, Duncan went on to share some tools and examples of how to get back to being creative. So he posed the question to the audience, where do we get our best ideas? And people shouted out multiple answers, like in the shower, while commuting to work, running, exercising, but no one said while at work. So why is that? And as I touched on earlier, it's because you don't really have time to think at work. Your brain is busy. Studies have shown that we only use 13% of our conscious brain, and that 13% is occupied. So what is the solution there? What can we do? And Duncan goes into the idea that you really have to make time for it. Many successful companies like Google, 3M, Intel actually give their employees time off to be creative. So they wanted to promote innovation and to protect productivity. So they came up with the idea of innovation time off, or ITO. So it's to encourage employees to generate new ideas. And it's proven to work. At 3M, they called this ITO 15% time, which is said to have led to the idea, the discovery of the Post-it note. And at Google, they call it the 20% time policy. And that is said to have led to the creation of Gmail. And then at Intel, they created a policy called thinking time. So Tuesday mornings, employees took their work offline. They canceled meetings, they forwarded calls to voicemail. And so really the point is that when you take time off for innovation, you have to clear away all the distraction. Okay, so moving on, how do we innovate? What are the tools that Duncan shared? So one way to do this is by changing your rivers of thinking. And so what does this mean? So it's really asking the most absurd what if questions to get innovative solutions. So one way of doing this is taking the rules of the industry, of any industry, and asking what if. And so the example here, before Walt Disney created Disneyland, the idea had to come from somewhere. So take the movie theater example, and these next couple slides are actually all true stories, by the way. So Walt Disney took the rules of a common form of entertainment, the movie theater, and made a list of all the rules that apply, its limitations. And some of those things included like, okay, you have to show up on time. You have to stay seated in your seat. You're sitting inside a dark room and you're watching a screen. So all the characters are on a screen. So we took all of those rules and then he asked, what if? What if you can go outside? What if you can show up at any time? And instead of watching a screen, the characters are in real life. And what if they wear costumes? And so on and so forth. And this led to the creation of Disneyland. So the concept has also been applied to other innovators who already took existing concepts and asked what if. So the example that we're all familiar with is Blockbuster and Netflix. You know, Netflix really began just because one day a Blockbuster customer was sick and tired of all the movies he wanted to rent being sold out. He was tired of all the late fees. And so he took those rules and those limitations from Blockbuster and asked what if? What if no late fees? What if you can go to one place and every movie you ever wanted was available? And what if you never had to leave your house? So the next kind of example of ways to change your rivers of thinking is the idea of naive experts. So what are naive experts? They're individuals who will ask the embarrassing questions. They will look at things differently. And because of this, they can produce ideas that no one would have thought of or would have wanted to share. And so the way that Duncan demonstrated this was he asked everyone in the audience and gave everyone 7 seconds to draw a picture of a house. So at the end of the 7 seconds, everyone held up their pictures and every single person drew the same exact house. And you can see an example to the right. This is actually Megan's drawing of a house. So everyone drew the same house. So why was that? Why did we all draw the same thing? It's because what we're used to seeing. It's what we think a house looks like. It's what we were taught when we were children on how to draw a house. So now Disney was asked to develop a theme park in China, and they applied this idea of naive experts to their own planning. They were in a particular meeting one day, which included a bunch of engineers and architects, all of whom were white and male. And they invited one additional person, which was a Chinese woman chef. And so no one could figure out what she was doing in this meeting or why she was invited, but they were asked to do the same task that Duncan asked us, to draw a house. And so at the very end, everyone drew the same house except the chef. And you can see her example here of the dim sum architecture. So the whole idea of this is that, you know, it goes back to if you want to be different, you need to think different. And the idea is like diversity is innovation. You know, if someone doesn't look like you, they don't think like you, and you need to invite them to the meeting. So, and finally, one of the final remarks he said that really resonated most with us is that innovation and creativity really require a lot of bravery, because the opposite of bravery is conformity. And it's really not about conforming. It's opening your mind up to new ideas.
Okay, so now that our creative and innovative brains are engaged, and as Ali said, we're trying to change the rivers of thinking. We're asking absurd what if questions. I want to recap a session that was called Ride the High Country, Recalibrating Strategic Direction in the COVID-19 Era. This was with Darth Vaughn, he's litigation counsel with Ford Motor Company, Monica Johnson, GC of Daragold, and it was led by Beth Couzone with Goulston and Stores. What's great about this session is that it's through the client lens, and I think that that's always the thing that everybody wants to hear is like, what do your clients want? What do in-house counsel want? One of the things that they had said in the very beginning is they want innovative legal talent and they don't care where it comes from. So the first thing that was shared was, how do they define innovation? Like, what do they think of as innovation? So on the left, you're going to see a couple things that they define as innovation. On the right, what's not. So the first one is, thinking outside the box by peeking around the corner at what's next. And this applies to every single one of your clients. It doesn't even matter if you're a law firm or professional service, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Clients want to know what is on the horizon. What is the challenge that they will face next? And this is really fulfilling and identifying unrealized needs. So it's not just understanding their needs, but unrealized needs, and then demonstrating impact. For example, one of panelists said that your ideas don't even have to be fully fleshed out, but what is the impact you can make? What are the ideas that you can bring to the table? New market innovation, again, we're still talking about peeking around the corner. and going from an ivory tower to strategic advisor, which I had mentioned before. And I talk a little bit later about that, but that's really, it's so important. You're not just a lawyer, you're not just a law firm solving legal challenges. You are trying to meet their business objectives and aligning legal strategies around their business objectives. So what they said innovation isn't, and I loved hearing this because so many firms we hear say that they do this and they think it's, what clients want, but planning and thinking about their needs. This is basic. This is ideating, not innovation. It's almost like when people say they utilize technology. So what does this mean? You use a computer, you use a printer. So planning is basic. Answering your phone and email, responsiveness, again, basic. That is not innovation. Email alerts. Now, this is especially with irrelevant email alerts. A lot of the panelists agreed that they love email alerts, and we're going to talk about that later as well, but they equally hate alerts that don't apply to them. And I think that this comes down to really making sure that you've got the right list and the right content, because one of the panelists said she always is getting environmental alerts from one law firm, and she doesn't have any environmental problems, and it's really irrelevant. So the other, what is not innovation, is never reaching out. And this is very much fear-based for law firms. They fear reaching out to the client because they don't want to shake things up. They don't want to, they just want to continue the status quo. The clients are happy enough. We're getting work. Let's not, poke the bear, so to speak. And so they want to hear from their legal counsel. They want to, not just on what the current work is, but what the future holds, what they can bring to the table that's different and fulfilling their unrealized needs. The next question that was asked to the panelists is, if they were running a law firm, what would they do? So there were three things that we sort of boiled it down to. One is that law firms are sitting on a gold mine of data. Now, data is not a new idea. Using data has become really essential for law firms to provide a competitive advantage. I mean, using data-driven insights, it helps you pitch better, it helps you land clients, and it helps you be more predictive when you're servicing your clients. And the fact is, almost all lawyers are billing every 6 minutes, or at least writing everything down. The question is are you leveraging to gain value from it? And if not, Darth Vaughan specifically had said, employ data analysts to extract this, create some structure and get value. This can also create new revenue streams. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here. The other is embrace technology. Now, this seems like a duh moment, but what I thought was interesting is like Zoom. Okay, we all have Zoom fatigue. I know I do, but you can't deny that Zoom has helped a lot more than it has hurt. It's what has sort of like gotten us through the pandemic in terms of business. Firstly, it makes people more comfortable. We know that. We know also that you don't have to travel, so you're not as tired. It's not as chaotic to go to things. It saves an immense amount of time. But I think the point here was that everyone is really worried about getting back to normal, and we get that. I think we're all in that place. But the point is that you have to embrace where we are right now and embrace what we have. Stop coming up with excuses to postpone a Zoom because it would be more effective in person. Do what you need to do through the means that you have today. And don't think about, well, this would be better as an in-person brown bag lunch. I don't want to do it over Zoom. I'm going to lose people. Embrace what we have now. And then the last piece was that, law firms are very tough to innovate. And this is why we put change and chance on here. Just to be honest, the current law firm environment at most law firms, not all, doesn't allow for innovation. I put this quote on here because this really resonated, but Stephen Poore, he was with Seyfarth Shaw. He advised us, he said, never underestimate the resistance to change from lawyers. Even more likely, never underestimate the ability of lawyers to describe virtual status quo efforts as revolutionary change. Now, this, Darth gave an example specifically that I thought was really relevant. When he was in private practice, he created a really sophisticated automation system. And I really can't recall the details of what the automation system was for, but it was really great for this law firm. But he was scrutinized for lack of billable hours. He was never rewarded, never applauded for the innovation he brought to life. Now, we can talk about the current law firm environment for hours. We can talk about how law schools, especially, they look so much like 20, 30 years ago and needs a total transformation. And really correcting this at most law firms is going to take a really long time, but firms really need to start to change incentives and change how the creation of innovation is rewarded. And in turn, in the same vein, clients need to incentivize law firms to innovate. Outside counsel, the panel really said that the outside counsel should be in survival mode, because in several years from now, you're not going to be able to catch up. And there's really got to be more innovators out there. So why should I care? And I thought this was a good one, because the moderator asked this question, and it just, to me, it was really spot on. Like, why should lawyers care about innovation? The point is that they should be doing great legal work and solving clients' problems. And why do we need to be innovative? And simply put, it's because lawyers have a duty, and it's stated in the American Bar Association Model Rule 1.1, a hallmark of lawyers' duties. Competent representation means that you have a duty as a lawyer to assess the risk and benefit of technology. And you also have a duty as a lawyer to find efficiencies in your work. And innovation is very much baked into that. So one of the questions that was asked to the panelists was, how do you get and keep work for clients? Okay, so the first tip that was given was, you need to move from reactive to business aligned. And this goes back to like stepping down from the ivory tower and being a strategic advisor. This was one of the slides the panelists shared. And there's a big difference to being proactive and efficient than to being business aligned. Becoming a strategic business partner means you are the agents of change. Your legal priorities are aligned with your client goals. Your KPIs and the metrics at which you really measure yourselves are constantly refined, because those things do not stay the same. And you have to have the ability to predict and project. If you cannot say these things about what you're doing for clients, you're likely just proactive. And I thought that this was a really good, this slide kind of shows the phases of the levels of evolution when it comes to being a strategic business advisor. The other, several other tips in terms of how do you get and keep work from clients is survey clients and measure it. I mean, this is not a new idea either. We all know and understand the importance of client surveys and putting that into action. One of the things that another panel mentioned was the fact that client surveys have been a lot more successful during the pandemic, because people are a lot more comfortable doing it via Zoom. The other tip was to create a feedback loop with client and outside counsel. I mean, this includes qualitative assessments, and it goes both ways to making sure everyone's effective. So there's a lot of ways to create feedback loops. I mean, it could be, you know, a specific agenda every month or every quarter, depending on the frequency. And it's really specific to how the two firms are communicating together, because oftentimes there are these small communication hiccups that go on for a really long time, and it leaves a bad taste in people's mouth. I know there was one example of just like the way that a law firm was billing the client, and there was this issue that was going on, but no one really talked about it, but the client was really annoyed by it, and it wasn't discovered until many months later, and really the way that they were billing was overshadowing their great legal work. So feedback loops are really important. 4 is come with ready-made solutions. And again, this doesn't need to be completely thought through, but how can you help to determine and combat what's on the horizon? And remember that you don't have to have it all figured out. It's about collaboration. What clients kept saying on this panel, they want you to pick up the phone. They want you to share an idea at no charge, especially if it's related to, you know, an ongoing case or a challenge that you've talked about in the past. And I want to underscore that this isn't an email. They're open to emails, but this is like picking up the phone and talking about, here's the impact, here's the solution. They want a tactical plan. And again, this is not, fully fleshed out ideas. This is what we see, this is what we predict, and this is what we want to tell you. The other, which we've talked about, don't fear taking chances. Clients know that you're not going to bat 1,000. This isn't an environment for status quo. Everyone is open to new things out of necessity. And if you don't take risks at some point, you're going to lose out to a firm that does. And again, remember that innovation happens at every level, and it's not relationship or size specific. The other interesting point was marketing your stuff to current clients, right? They want to know what other services you provide. And this isn't just services. For example, are you working on a new technology? Invite them to see it. And innovation is not just technology. It could be a change in management, an important firm milestone. These are all things that the client wants to know about. Last but not least, and we can have a whole webinar on this, but offering alternative legal services. So this was something that they talked a little bit about, which is that you should be partnering with alternative legal services to scale. If you are charged with cost efficiency, don't fear losing the client. You are going to be looked at as an innovator and a cost-saving solution. You will become valuable and a trusted firm in the boardroom. And at the end of the day, you're going to get more work from the client in the long run. Okay, so what's the door opener for a firm you don't know? So this is a big one that, of course, how do you get the work? And so it's kind of a continuation of the last one, but it's really like you can do this for current clients and you can do this for potential clients. But one of the first things, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about, which is what are the top 3 things you can do for me? Clients want to know, if you are an outside counsel, you don't know them, in an email, in a phone call, in whatever format you choose, what are the top 3 things you can do for me? Be concise. And then ask for input. What problems are they looking to solve? Maybe you have a hint or a glimmer of what they're looking to solve, but it's not, again, fully fleshed out. Here's the top 3 things, and ask for their input. Be purposeful, find a way to get their attention. There was a few examples that I thought were really smart. One example was host a podcast and invite them to talk. They're very much still interested in industry events and virtual ones. So host a virtual industry event with different speakers, different lawyers, different types of people, and invite them to listen. And they said they still take a lunch, they do it 1 hour at lunch. Do your homework, everything from, you need to, this is such a basic thing, but at every conference we always hear it again and again. It's like, who do they do business with? Find the nexus or connections. Maybe it's, they're an avid biker. There could be personal connections that you can find. There's a lot on the internet, so do your homework. Meet at mutual places like industry events and follow up with your discussions with them. Both Allie and I, we had side conversations with both of the panelists just to talk about some things that they had mentioned, and it was a great connection. Now, we're obviously, we're not in the position of like, we're going to get work from them, but that would be something great if you saw them speak at a place and you approached them and talked to them and had that introduction. Make it personal, as I mentioned, look beyond just the bio. What are they interested in and passionate about? Is it DEI? Is it philanthropy? I'm sure there's so many connections that your firm and their firm or their themselves personally can draw together in terms of these things that you're passionate about. And lastly, be bold. Don't hold yourself back because you don't want to disrupt the status quo during times of uncertainty. You really need to squash that feeling.
Okay, so going back to, and really just tying into the last point of Megan's session is really, how do law firms get a foot in the door? And this really brings us to the next session that we wanted to recap for you, which is on building sales teams. So, every business leader or firm or sales team has a preferred approach, to building a successful team, but despite these different approaches or ideas of how they execute, the goal really remains the same, and it's really to effectively engage the customer. So during this presentation, which was given by Neil Leilani of Global, he was the global head of tech for Oric, and Christian Berger, he's the senior advisor of strategic business development at McGuire Woods. So they really dug into different approaches in building a sales team that really effectively engages the customer. And we're going to focus on just some of the main areas. We're not going to get into every detail, but this is the main areas that Neil and Christian really covered. And then we'll go into the sales process. So Neil and Christian really posed the question to the audience, what is a client seeking from a service provider? And so the first answer and the first area we're going to go into is that that is really outstanding service. So what does that mean, or what does that look like? And the audience provided some examples, which really are that outstanding service means achieving the desired outcomes. You can do that on time and under budget, and with the desired communication that's been agreed upon. So providing outstanding service to clients is really something that attorneys live and breathe. So why do they struggle with outstanding service in the prospect process? And this is one of the areas, again, that Christian really pointed out. And the simple answer is that, not all attorneys are salespeople. Having a JD does not qualify or disqualify you for sales. And so teams can really be made up of non-attorneys. And so what makes for a successful salesperson, or what does that profile look like? Again, this question was something the panelists asked, and some audience members shared some of their examples. And really, it means that the person is interactive in the deal-making process. It's someone who can create connections through personal stories. They understand that what you're trying to sell should be an easy-to-buy model. This salesperson should have a drive and willingness to sell and has courage. And then one point that stood out is that they also look ahead. I mean, this is something Megan has touched on, and what the conference really hammered in is looking ahead. And an example that Neil shared actually is on how their own firm implements this is that his sales team has a weekly meeting where each team member comes prepared with ideas that are forward-looking. So that could be, what's trending in their space, who's interested in this thing, and who's in the market. So then they pick one of those ideas to analyze and learn about, and it could be new technology, emerging technology, and often, he even mentioned that they implement some of these new ideas. And then the final area they talked about is really what are the KPIs for a sales team? And these really should be set from the start. They mentioned there's a variety of things. Not every team has the same KPIs, but some of those include, the collected revenue from new business, who is the relationship partner for the new business, obtaining qualified pitch meetings. One of the panelists said that he obtained 267 pitch meetings, and out of all of those pitch meetings, he landed 33 clients. And then the final piece is deepening client relationships. I mean, these are things that are broad, but each firm has their own idea of what deepening client relationships mean. Okay, so let's get into the sales process now. So this is really from Christian. He gave us an overview of what his process looks like for his team, and it consists of these 3 steps. The first is prospecting. So what is prospecting? It's everything before you actually get the qualified pitch meeting. And prospecting only counts if you solicit a meeting. So that means you should be directly asking the customer or prospect that you want a meeting, and that they know that you'll be offering an incentive or market knowledge. So that should be made known. The second aspect is, and this is the most important part that Christian talked about, is pitching. The main goal for pitching should be to create a dialogue, to achieve dialogue that allows for the customer to consider the proposal, that it results in you asking what's next. So he gave the example of this aspect as a hill. The bottom of the hill, as you can see in the image here, is really the softball questions. Getting to know the client, what are their goals? And the goal is to get to the top. The top of the hill is what's next. Will they buy from you and when? But you really cannot jump from the bottom to the top. You have to work your way up. And so the final takeaway really from Christian and Neil was, what are some of the barriers to an effective sales team? And they talked about the biggest barrier being partner compensation. And, this is something that could, absolutely go on for hours and hours as well. But we wanted to just give you a couple of the key takeaways that they shared, that partner compensations really create a lot of challenges because many have like subjective factors baked into them. And that can really undermine culture at a firm. And really, no matter what system you use, lockstep, formula, hybrid, or black box system, they each can impact efforts to kind of build a collegial environment. And if there's a perceived unfairness, this can also impact culture. But this is a very complex topic and something that, we could really get into, but really the bottom line from Christian and Neil was that compensation systems don't encourage collaboration. They're the hardest to change. And if you do embark on a change, you can risk losing rainmakers in the process.
Okay, so we're going to pivot a little. We've talked about creativity and innovation, and Ali, just talked about sales teams. So we're going to pivot to a few sessions where that is sort of a compilation of some sessions that covered marketing spend and the host of challenges that came and we're still facing during the COVID era. So we all know that COVID brought a host of challenges personally, professionally. On the business front, there was a lot of questions like, how do you be productive? How do you bring in business? How do you collaborate? And I think, some of these questions may feel like eons ago and we figured it all out. Some are, clearly still problems in the virtual world. But I put a picture of a water spigot because it really feels like a water spigot turning on and off. Obviously surges can make things, the surge that we're currently facing can make things really challenging. And so it's like, how do you keep up with like the ebbs and flows of the water spigot? And one of the things that some of the panelists, throughout a couple sessions had mentioned is now we've really got to be three things, and I've listed them here. We have to be deliberate or intentional, we have to be thoughtful, and we have to re-engage on everything. So to start with, kind of recalibrating spend, there were a lot of really good things that came from COVID. Some of the just general positives is it forced us to be flexible. There were firms that could never have imagined in a million years that they could operate virtually, and they did it successfully. The other thing, it really trimmed the firm fat. A lot of firms got rid of what just wasn't needed anymore. I mean, especially from a financial perspective, I think a lot of firms like just started looking through everything and cutting and trimming and cutting and trimming out of necessity. But it really was like a very good exercise for most firms and just got rid of a lot that we didn't need. And then third is it brought back so many meaningful things. And I think we can all appreciate, like engaging with our family and being home for dinner and not being out necessarily 4 times a week at different industry events. So there were a lot of pros. Some of the opportunities that different panelists mentioned, I thought were really fabulous. Like one, there was a lot of new partnerships that came about during COVID. One example a panelist shared was, COVID is full of misinformation. Even today, we can't quite figure out what's true, what's fake. It's really challenging. And so one of the firms, they partnered with Johns Hopkins, and it was to really produce real health information, not only to their firm, but to their clients. And, a lot of firms, they put together like their COVID teams and things like that. But this was really like a lot of different partnerships were created. And that was an interesting opportunity. A lot of people found more time to spend on marketing. One firm, they were all litigators, and so courts were closed, and so they spent a lot more time on thought leadership pieces or marketing efforts that had really fallen by the wayside for many years. The other opportunity was it accelerated programs that we've been wanting to do, like client surveys. As I mentioned, many were much more willing to do these virtually. It also gave a runway to longer term projects like technology changes. One firm, completely revamped, sort of doing a proposal generation capability. One firm did a rebrand. It just created an opportunity to spend time on these nagging projects. The other is there's more data, which I thought was really interesting because, sometimes it's been really hard for a lot of firms to go from, an in-person event that they put on to virtual. There's so many things, but one of the things that it brings is data. Like virtual conferences, it shows how many people are showing up, when people drop, how long people are engaged for, and you can't do that in person. So everything has analytics tied to it, which I thought was really, it's really smart. I think those attorneys or folks that had relationship-based mentalities, everything was done on a handshake. This group really embraced Zoom networking, and for the most part, they embraced it. They've created new ideas like virtual roundtables. I mean, it essentially proved that it can happen through other ways than being out several times during the week. And of course, technology is now part of everyone's role and everyone's skill set. It is no longer in silos.
So when it comes to budgets, as Megan mentioned earlier, I mean, many firms trimmed the fat, as she explained. Some, some of the budgets seem to be completely slashed, but it actually led to firms cleaning up and really removing the initiatives that were wasteful. And this is a common thing we heard from many panelists. But a common question that came up was, has law firm marketing spend changed for good? And the short of it is yes and no. Many view it as kind of a pendulum, which is going to swing back the other way. But there was a consensus that the focus of budgets has really changed for good. And some of the things they talked about was that it became more about, creative gift giving and thoughtful gestures and finding ways to connect with people really at a different level. Do they have kids at home, or, are they stuck at home, and just finding those really thoughtful gestures. And with all that happened in the past year and a half, there was also more of a focus on community outreach events. And then, as Megan pointed out as well, there's been a focus on data. So really anything that couldn't be proven with analytics was cut out. So overall, these changes really forced firms to create better systems and structures and processes for the budgets. And so again, going back to embracing change or being left behind, I mean, this was a great example of how a lot of firms, had no choice but to embrace these changes. And for many, it brought new opportunities. And I think we'll be seeing a lot of these changes implemented for good.
Okay, so recruiting. One of the biggest pain points in nearly every industry. So we're going to completely shift gears here. So I have a friend that owns a restaurant, and several months ago, I remember walking in, and I saw him as the host, and then he sat us, and later he actually was waiting the table, and later he was also the bartender, and it was because he couldn't fill any shoes. And he has a great staffing need, and law firms are no exception. I mean, every single industry is being hurt. Recruiting and keeping lawyers is nothing short of a nightmare right now. This is why the panel on aligning brand and talent acquisition to reality will really hit home for a lot of folks. The panel included Cameron Garrison, managing partner and executive committee chair of Lathrop GPM, Iris Jones, she's chief marketing and BD officer with Ackerman, and Jason Lyon, he's the litigation and hiring partner with Hahn & Hahn. It was moderated by Michael Ellenhorn, founder of Decipher. One of the things that I really like about this panel is all very different sized firms sharing their insights. So I want to start with a couple slides. This was presented by Decipher and Accretus. They are Accretus Lateral Partner Satisfaction Survey. I believe they do this every year, but this is a really good starter. So the first thing is 70% of partners looked at more than one firm before making a move. No surprise here, but you can see the stats on the right, like how many firms did they consider? 1, 30%, 2 to 3, 35% at the highest, 4 to 6, 27%. So they're shopping around. We knew that. Let's move on. What laterals on? Okay, this is the good stuff. So on a scale 1 to 5, they ranked the most important item that they want is practice area support and firm culture. These are the top motivators, and it beats out anticipated compensation. And you can see the next one on the list in terms of priority is personality of partners. So compensation is pretty low on the list. I mean, if you look at this here, it's like financial health, well managed, then anticipated compensation. So this was a really interesting one. The other is meeting lateral expectations. So on a scale 1 to 5, they ranked the following on their expectations being met. So what was communicated to them versus when they got to the firm and they were, brand new, did that meet their expectations? No category broke a 4. And so that's interesting. So what is being told to laterals as the reality of the firm is just not the reality. The next is, so Crea asked laterals whether they received adequate and accurate information about the firm in several categories. And you can see nothing really broke above 80. So financial health was sort of the top at 77%, compensation practices, so on and so forth. So they're not getting fully adequate and accurate information. So where do we stumble? So these are a couple, like lateral partner failure rates are very high. 48% of laterals leave their new firm within 5 years. 62% of laterals fail to bring in their promised book of business. This is a tough one because we all know it can take a couple years before that promised book of business hits. But that's a pretty high failure rate, and 35% of laterals fail to fit in at their new firm. So these are some of the stumbling blocks. How candid was the firm? So as you can see this pie chart here, majority of the pie chart was either somewhat candid, can't say, not very candid, or not candid at all. So only 44% of firms were candid with their lateral hires. And so there's clearly a big discrepancy between what is communicated to the lateral and what is reality. So, okay, so what does this mean? So now that we have a little bit backdrop on statistics, which I think is always fascinating, what does it mean to have a talent brand and differentiate yourself? So brands is what gets you the conversation. It's what gets you the best candidates and gets them to turn their head. But how do you grab someone's attention that's seeking an opportunity? And of course, it depends on the candidate. They're all looking for something different. But I wanted to give a few examples. So Ackerman, what they, in terms of what do they do to get candidates to turn their head? They market the fact that they're familial, that they're warm and engaging. They are big on racial justice initiatives. You're going to get a significant amount of support from the marketing and BD team. Han and Han, on the other hand, their market and talent brand are very aligned due to the size because they're a small firm. So their brand is the attorneys. The attorneys are the brand, but they also promote the fact that they do a huge amount of service. So politics, boards, industry service, etc. So it's really about what's important to your firm and how you're communicating that. Because again, we can't predict what a candidate is looking for. I mean, we can safely say there's several categories of what they're looking for. Culture, compensation, you saw the big part, partner personalities. But once they're in the door, what are you presenting to them? So this is where the panelists talked about what are the key elements of aligning your brand and reality. So it starts with you've got to get rigorous about defining your brand. And I think that there's a big discrepancy between large and small firms. I mean, it's easier with small firms because you can get everyone in the room. Like at Han and Han, their functions have overlap. Their business development, marketing folks, But regardless of size, you need to define your brand. So I want to give a couple examples here. So at Han and Han, they're a small firm. It was mostly about the fact for a long time that they were this 122-year-old firm, but they really wanted to switch from your grandpa's law firm to something more modern. And Jason saw the opportunity that he saw the fact that majority of the partners were women, and they had never promoted that. So they started to switch from the grandpa's law firm to, you know, sort of a more women focused promotion. One of the things that, you know, with larger firms, of course, cultures can differ from office to office. I mean, departments are siloed, you become decentralized. And honestly, at the end of the day, with every lateral or small acquisition, you change a little. Not everyone's going to conform. So your brand will adjust. There's nothing you can do about it, no matter how good your like immersion programs are. One example that Ackerman said, and really this is, to me, this was so important, is that everything that you put out there, it needs to be 100% true. You cannot be like a misleading dating profile, okay? Some firms look so good on paper, but it's not the reality. Or some firms, they haven't updated their paper in so long, and it's not the reality. And this is one of the worst mistakes that you can make. And this is not just about paper. This is about what you verbalize. Like, you know, you can control who is your recruiting partners, who are your recruiting mascots, your recruiting ambassadors. So it's not just like having a great recruiting brochure or, you know, paper, but it's also about the message that's being conveyed. Is it true? Does it match reality? And at the end of the day, usually it doesn't. So one, you know, I think also with larger firms, this is a basic, but you need to have some sort of immersion or integration process for laterals, and you should, where every single department is involved, not just the department that they're going to be working under. You have to bring people together. That's key. And you don't just do that for the first 100 days. It's got to go throughout the year. Lathrop GPM, for example, they announced a really big merger in January 2020, and it changed the firm's name to what it is today. One of the smart things that they did was they waited on strategy planning because they wanted to get to know each other first. So there are a lot of firms out there that would put these robust plans together, but they've never really worked together yet. And how can you put the strategy together when there are two completely different firms that are joining forces? Another smart thing that they did was they created a culture committee with people from each past firm that defines the culture. So when you're doing these small acquisitions or lateral hires, like really think about how it is changing your culture. It doesn't mean that you've got to put this strategy, 6 months in advance, but think about the strategy when people are actually in the door. It just creates a new path forward versus forcing people on the old path. One of the most noteworthy comments on the panel was that the interview process really should not only be lawyer facing, but it also should be admin facing. And I use admin loosely. It's like you need to showcase the talent and the support of the entire firm. So this is bringing in marketing and business development. So the point is, when it comes to interviews, it's really simple. A partner asks a bunch of questions, and then the potential lateral asks a bunch of questions. Okay, we know that. So the point is not that the marketing and BD department comes in and interviews in the same process, but they should sell the candidate. The partners and the other people involved in interviews, they're going to vet the lawyer, right? But bring in marketing and BD to sell the potential candidate. This staff also reinforces the brand message because they live it. They probably live it more than the attorneys themselves. So how much of this is just hiring the right person? One of the panelists said that you're not trying to find a lawyer, but your people. And I think that's really important. Show them who you are. Don't be afraid to turn them off. Because if there's something that you're afraid will come up in the interview about the firm, they're going to leave anyways. They're going to find out and they're going to leave anyways. So just be authentic. Explain to them what is true about, and this also can't be top down. The culture is not created top down. It's also marketing can't create it. Your culture is your culture. So make sure that what your culture is and versus what the top down or marketing is the same. And it's usually not. Now, Lathrop gave a really good example. So right now, Lathrop GPM has a hybrid workplace. And I don't think that this was his exact words, but he was like, we don't know what we're doing with the hybrid workplace. And so it's like, we know that they're communicating. We know that we may not get it right. And this is going to take time, but they're telling their staff this. They're not just saying like, we've got it. Hybrid workplace is new to everyone. And I think at the end of the day, there are no right or wrong cultures. For example, I will name a firm in my mind. This is not a friendly place to work, but you're going to try cases. You are going to first chair or second chair cases. This is a culture firm versus revenue. We're going to have our cultural camaraderie outings, and we've got the water cooler talk, but you're not going to make as much money. I mean, it's not about right or wrong. It's about who you are. And don't be aware of the negative experiences, of course, through exit interviews or Glassdoor. But what's more important is stay interviews. What's more important is why people stay. What's also more important, client feedback. So of course, there are going to be stains. How do you manage them? They're inevitable. Don't bury your head in the sand. You need to address it. Be committed to adjust what you need, of course, and also be engaged in listening to your new hires. And the other thing is, I'm sure many of you are already doing this, but anonymous surveys. I mean, a lot of things don't come out face-to-face or in performance reviews. So anonymous surveys are really big in terms of identifying some of the issues that are going on. So final tips here, be authentic. Okay, so this will help you find your people, and you're going to find the people that are going to be happy at your firm. And it comes down to, what is your message? Revisit the message. Be mindful when it's 4 years old, or be mindful when it's time to evolve or re-examine. You need to articulate this on your brand on paper and verbally. And then be candid about the trade-offs. Maybe you have a shifting brand like Han and Han did. Explain where you are now. Like if you're in the midst of this kind of hybrid workforce and you don't know what's going to happen, just tell them where you are now. So those are some of the pearls that we got.
Okay, so this is the final presentation. We're going to recap for you. And, we've heard a lot of culture being thrown around. And so this was really something that was talked a lot about. And so this next presentation that we wanted to highlight is on lone wolves and mavericks, managing law firm relationship partners. So in this session, a panel of speakers shared some of their practices and the challenges that come when partners are just not willing to engage their peers and they fall short of their potential. I mean, the overall impact of lone wolves and mavericks in a law firm is pretty steep, but several of the panelists shared some ways on how they tackle this at their firms. So we'll start with, what is the impact on a law firm? So lone wolves really lead to a big lack in collaboration and transparency at any firm. This can seriously impact retaining associates. This is a huge struggle, as we've just talked about. Many firms, for many firms, this could be a contributing issue. There's an increased risk of lift outs if partners that bring in business leave and take the work with them. The other impacts are that there is likely tension around giving credit and who gets what, because without a sense of collaboration, partners can lack any sort of collegial feelings, and they're just not willing to share. As a result, this impacts associates again. They have no incentive to expand business. And then lastly, an in-house counsel can sense when there is tension as well. A GC who was on the panel even remarked that sometimes these issues can and have spilled over to the client. So really, above all, all of these have a real impact and a negative impact on firm culture. But so what are firms doing to tackle this? So the panelists said that it's really important to project a firm culture and really know who you are. This is more important than ever before. I mean, we've been talking about this over and over again. So new generations and younger associates, they want to know what you stand for. So another thing that firms are doing are really talking about giving more opportunities to associates. And one way they do this, and some examples that we heard from the panelists, is on how to make collaboration really fun and get young talent involved early. So one example that a firm did and implemented was something called Fun Fact Friday. So really, this was an opportunity to profile a partner at the firm. The partner had the opportunity to talk about themselves, talk about their clients, and associates could listen and learn and get real life examples of how these partners got their business. The associates asked questions and kind of got an inside look on how this person achieved and got to where they are now. Another example of collaboration and how to make it fun was something a firm did called Counsel and Company. It's where the firm profiled a general counsel and their client at their actual company or campus. So during this event, GCs talked about their roles, and it was really an opportunity for them, the client, to introduce their team and to introduce the attorneys to the rest of the company. Attorneys brought other client contacts as well, and associates were brought as well. They were introduced and they were included in this meeting. So going back to other examples of what firms were doing, many panelists talked about succession planning, and that it's not just to prepare for retirement. Really, succession planning should be for all key clients so that you do avoid the risk of lift outs. That the idea of multiple points of contact at the company is really crucial. And this is where the general counsel on the panel weighed in. She said that, they don't want a lone wolf. They want access to the entire team. They want to feel that the door is open, and, developing a relationship with the GC beyond just the firm so that it kind of solidifies loyalty and, helps with that. And then the last, one of the other issues or ways, that firms are doing is having transparency in compensation. I mean, we talked about this being an issue when there's a lack of transparency. And the panelists talked about that, getting to the root cause of a lone wolf might have to do with some sort of undercurrent within a firm, and it may stem from origination and compensation issues. So if there's any way to understand where a partner might be, why a partner might be a lone wolf, and then to kind of institute changes to the law firm framework is going to help, this process. But, finally, we're going to keep this short and sweet, but, one of the final thoughts that they talked about was really how better collaboration helps firms' diversity overall. This was something that didn't go into too deeply, but, it was interesting what they said, that there's stats that have shown that law firms are bottom heavy where diverse talent sits. So it's law firm relationship managers at the partner level really need to engage with associates more than ever. But the good news is that this is happening more and more, and firms are really truly committed to fostering diverse talent and kind of expanding opportunities that are available for them. So that was really great news to hear. But really the bottom line is that, you really can't be a maverick, or you really can't be a lone wolf, because it's about engaging younger talent. So if you have this mentality ingrained into your firm, then the issue of lone wolves really will become lessened, and you'll be on your way to kind of helping improve firm culture.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this. I know it went a little bit over the hour. We want to just leave you with one thing, which is, we hope you got some pearls. We encourage law firms to not be stymied by innovation. Have bold ideas, do what's necessary to address deficiencies in your firms, and let's not use status quo and operate on fear. I mean, we have no choice but to continue innovating, continue thinking of new ideas to reshape what we've always done. And remember that innovation and these ideas is everyone's job. We greatly appreciate everyone listening in. Stay tuned for our other webinars, and this will be available for recording should any of your staff members want to hear it. So thank you so much, and we'll answer any questions that you've submitted afterwards, but we appreciate your time.